A wealthy millionaire thought he was playing a cruel joke when he gave his expensive car to a struggling mechanic. But months later, he's left speechless. What happens next will leave you stunned. Before we continue, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? I'd love to hear what city or country you're tuning in from. The gleaming Aston Martin purred to a stop outside Jake's auto repair, its metallic silver paint reflecting the afternoon sun. Ethan Calloway stepped out, his Italian leather shoes crunching on the gravel. He surveyed the dilapidated garage with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "Harper," Ethan called out, dangling the keys. "Got a little present for you." Jacob Harper emerged from beneath a rusty pickup truck, wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag. His eyes widened at the sight of the luxury car. "Mr. Calloway, what's this about?" Ethan's lips curled into a smirk. "Consider it a gift. She's all yours." Jacob's jaw dropped. I don't understand." "Oh, come now? You're always going on about needing a break. Well, here it is." Ethan tossed the keys, and Jacob caught them reflexively. "Enjoy." Without another word, Ethan strode to a waiting town car and disappeared, leaving Jacob standing in stunned silence. For a moment, Jacob simply stared at the keys in his hand, then at the gleaming car before him. A gift from Ethan Calloway. It didn't make sense. But as the initial shock wore off, a glimmer of hope sparked in Jacob's chest. Maybe this was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. "Well," he muttered to himself, "might as well see what she can do." Jacob popped the hood and whistled at the pristine engine. His skilled hands began to explore, checking fluids and connections. As he worked, his mind raced with possibilities. This car could be the key to turning his business around, to finally getting ahead. A horn honked, startling Jacob from his reverie. He looked up to see a beat-up minivan limping into the lot, smoke billowing from under the hood. A harried-looking woman climbed out, a young boy in tow. "Please tell me you're open," she said, desperation in her voice. Jacob wiped his hands and approached with a smile. "Always open for those in need. What seems to be the trouble, ma'am?" "Everything," she sighed. "I'm Emily, by the way, Emily Rivera, and this is my son, Mason." As Jacob bent to examine the smoking engine, Emily explained her situation. Widowed, struggling to make ends meet, and now facing a potentially expensive car repair. "Don't worry, Mrs. Rivera. I'll have you up and running in no time." Jacob's mind whirred with an idea. "In fact, why don't I give you a lift home while I work on your van? No sense in you two waiting around here." Emily's eyes widened as Jacob gestured to the Aston Martin. "In that, oh, we couldn't possibly dash." "I insist," Jacob said with a warm smile. "Consider it part of the service." As they cruised through town, Mason's eyes were as big as saucers, his face pressed against the window. Emily couldn't help but laugh at her son's excitement. "This is quite a car, Mr. Harper. I didn't realize auto repair was such a lucrative business." Jacob chuckled, deciding to keep the truth of the car's origin to himself for now. "Let's just say it's a recent acquisition. And please call me Jacob." Over the next few weeks, Jacob threw himself into his work with renewed vigor. The Aston Martin became his calling card, turning heads wherever he went. He used it to pick up parts, make house calls, and even deliver groceries to Emily and Mason when he learned they were having a particularly tough week. Word spread quickly about the mechanic with the heart of gold and the car of dreams. Business boomed, and Jacob found himself busier than ever. One afternoon, as Jacob was elbow-deep in an engine rebuild, a shadow fell across his workbench. He looked up to see three burly men, local mechanics from a rival garage. "Well, well," sneered the largest of the three, "if it ain't Cinderella and his magic carriage." Jacob straightened, wiping his hands slowly. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The leader stepped closer, his breath reeking of cheap beer. "Yeah, you can help by explaining how a grease monkey like you ended up with a ride like that." He jerked his thumb towards the Aston Martin. "That's my business," Jacob said evenly, though his heart was racing. "Your business is our business when you're stealing our customers," another man growled. Before Jacob could react, A meaty fist connected with his jaw, sending him stumbling backward. He raised his hands defensively as the three closed in. "Look, fellas, I'm not trying to dash." Jacob's words were cut short by another blow, this one to his ribs. The scuffle was brief, but brutal. Jacob managed to land a few solid punches of his own, but he was outnumbered. As quickly as it had begun, it was over. The three men retreated, leaving Jacob bruised and panting. "This ain't over, Harper," the leader called over his shoulder. "Watch your back." Jacob slumped against his workbench, wincing as he gingerly touched his split lip. But as he looked around his garage, at the cars waiting to be fixed, at the little gifts from grateful customers like Emily, a steely resolve settled over him. He wouldn't let a few thugs derail everything he'd built. With renewed determination, Jacob threw himself into his work. He poured every ounce of skill and passion into each repair, each act of kindness. The Aston Martin became a beacon of hope in the community, showing up at food banks, shelters, and wherever else it was needed. One evening, as Jacob was locking up the garage, he noticed a flyer stuck to his door. It was an advertisement for an upcoming charity gala featuring a familiar silver car. Jacob's breath caught in his throat as he read the details. The organizers wanted him and the car to be the centerpiece of their event, showcasing the power of community and second chances. As Jacob stared at the flyer, a mix of emotions washed over him. Pride at what he'd accomplished, gratitude for the unexpected gift that had made it all possible, and a twinge of anxiety about stepping into the spotlight. Little did he know, across town, Ethan Calloway was settling into his plush leather office chair, a glass of scotch in hand. His eyes narrowed as he scrolled through his tablet, pausing on a local news article. The headline read, "Local mechanic turns luxury car into vehicle for change." Ethan's grip tightened on the glass as he recognized his own Aston Martin in the accompanying photo. This was not how his little joke was supposed to play out. Not at all. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across Jacob's humble garage and Ethan's towering office building, the stage was set for a confrontation neither man could have anticipated. The car that was meant to be a punchline had become a symbol of something far greater, and the ripples of its impact were only beginning to be felt. Ethan Calloway's polished Oxfords clicked against the marble floor of his corner office. He paced, phone pressed to his ear, his usually composed demeanor cracking. "What do you mean the deal's off?" Ethan's knuckles whitened around the phone. "We've been working on this for months." The voice on the other end droned on about market fluctuations and investor hesitation. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Fix it," he hissed, ending the call. He slumped into his leather chair, loosening his tie. The skyline beyond his window, once a testament to his success, now seemed to mock him. His empire, built on shrewd deals and cutthroat tactics, was showing cracks. A gentle knock interrupted his brooding. Amanda Calloway, his sister, entered, her kind eyes a stark contrast to Ethan's stormy gaze. "Rough day." She perched on the edge of his desk. Ethan scoffed. "Nothing I can't handle." Amanda's lips thinned. "You know, there's more to life than quarterly reports and stock prices." "Save the lecture, Amanda. I'm not in the mood for your charity spiel." "It's not about charity, Ethan. It's about finding meaning beyond wealth." Ethan stood abruptly, turning his back on her. "My wealth is my meaning. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run." Amanda sighed, heading for the door. "Just think about it, okay?" As the door closed, Ethan's eyes fell on a magazine on his desk. A familiar silver car graced the cover, but he dismissed it as coincidence. His mind was too preoccupied with damage control to dwell on a car he'd given away months ago. Across town, Jacob Harper maneuvered the Aston Martin through narrow streets, its engine purring softly. He pulled up to a small, weathered house where Emily Rivera waited on the porch, her son Mason bouncing excitedly beside her. "Mr. Jacob," Mason called out, rushing to the car. Jacob climbed out, ruffling the boy's hair. "Hey, champ, ready for your big day?" Emily approached, her smile warm but tinged with worry. "Jacob, I can't thank you enough for this." "It's my pleasure, Emily." Mason deserves a great birthday." They loaded party supplies into the car, Mason chattering about his friends and the cake. As Jacob helped Emily with a heavy box, their hands brushed. A moment of charged silence passed between them before Emily cleared her throat. "So, I heard about the charity gala," Emily said as they drove. "That's incredible, Jacob." Jacob's cheeks flushed. "It's not a big deal. Just doing what I can to help." "It is a big deal," Emily insisted. "You've changed so many lives, including ours." As they unloaded at the party venue, a sleek black car pulled up. Grant Myers, chairman of the local charity organization, stepped out. "Jacob, glad I caught you," Grant beamed, shaking Jacob's hand. "I wanted to personally invite you to our upcoming gala. We'd love to showcase your work." Jacob's eyes widened. "Me? But I'm just a mechanic." Grant chuckled. "A mechanic who's become a symbol of hope in this community. What'd he say?" Jacob glanced at Emily, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd be honored, Mr. Myers." As Grant departed, Jacob felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He was no longer just a mechanic with a fancy car. He was becoming something more. The night of the gala arrived, transforming the local community center into a glittering affair. Jacob, dressed in a borrowed suit, felt out of place among the city's elite. The Aston Martin, polished to perfection, stood proudly on display. As Jacob mingled, he overheard snippets of conversation about his work. The attention was overwhelming, but Emily's steady presence at his side kept him grounded. "You're doing great," she whispered, squeezing his arm. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the car. A red-faced man in an expensive suit was gesturing wildly at the Aston Martin. "That's Calloway's car," the man shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Jacob. "This man stole it." The room fell silent. Jacob felt all eyes on him as he approached the irate man. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding," Jacob began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "No misunderstanding." The man spat. "I know that car. Ethan Calloway's prized possession. What's a grease monkey like you doing with it?" Before Jacob could respond, Grant Myers stepped between them. "That's enough, Mr. Worthington. Jacob Harper is our honored guest, and I can assure you, he came by this car legitimately." The man, Worthington, sneered. "We'll see about that. I'm calling security." As Worthington stormed off, Jacob felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He hadn't stolen the car, but how could he explain Ethan's gift without sounding crazy? Across the room, Ethan Calloway watched the scene unfold with growing unease. He'd attended the gala as a reluctant sponsor, but now found himself face to face with the consequences of his cruel joke. The Aston Martin gleamed under the spotlights, restored to its former glory. But it was more than that now. It was a symbol of something Ethan had never considered: hope. As security approached, Jacob steeled himself for the worst. But before they reached him, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Stand down, gentlemen. There's been a misunderstanding." Ethan Calloway strode forward, his expression unreadable. The crowd parted, whispers rippling through the room. Jacob's eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Calloway." Ethan nodded curtly. "The car belongs to Mr. Harper. I gave it to him." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Worthington sputtered. But why?" Ethan's gaze locked with Jacob's. In that moment, the full weight of his actions hit him. This man, whom he'd intended to humiliate, had turned a prank into a force for good. "Because," Ethan said slowly, "I believed he could do more good with it than I ever could." The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by murmurs of admiration. Jacob stood stunned, unable to process Ethan's unexpected support. As the gala resumed, Ethan found himself cornered by his sister, Amanda. "That was unexpected," she said, studying him closely. Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. It was the truth. Amanda's eyes narrowed. Was it? Or is there more to this story? Before Ethan could respond, Grant Myers approached, beaming. "Mr. Calloway, I had no idea you were behind Jacob's incredible work. You must be so proud." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Proud. He'd never even considered the impact of his actions beyond the initial joke. As Grant continued to sing Jacob's praises, Ethan's discomfort grew. He excused himself, needing air, only to find himself face to face with Jacob in a quiet corner of the ballroom. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Jacob broke the silence first. "Why did you lie for me?" Ethan's carefully constructed facade cracked. I don't know." Jacob's eyes hardened. "You don't know? You gave me that car as a joke, didn't you? To watch me fail." Ethan flinched at the accusation, true as it was. "I never expected this." "No, you wouldn't have," Jacob said bitterly. "You probably don't even remember me, do you? I used to work for one of your companies, until you decided to streamline operations and laid off half the workforce." The color drained from Ethan's face as recognition dawned. Jacob Harper, you were in R&D." Jacob nodded grimly. "That layoff nearly ruined me, but this car, it gave me a second chance. A chance to help others who were struggling like I was." Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. His cruel joke, meant to amuse himself at the expense of someone he saw as beneath him, had instead sparked a chain of events he could never have predicted. As the gravity of the situation settled over them, the sounds of the gala faded into the background. Two men, separated by wealth and circumstance, stood at a crossroads. The car that was meant to be a punchline had become a bridge, connecting lives in ways neither could have imagined. Ethan Calloway, titan of industry, found himself humbled in the presence of Jacob Harper, a mechanic who had turned a moment of mockery into a movement of hope. And as the night wore on, the seeds of change began to take root in Ethan's heart, promising a transformation that would ripple far beyond the walls of this glittering gala. The chandelier's light fractured across the ballroom, casting a dazzling glow over the charity gala. Ethan Calloway stood at the periphery, his perfectly tailored suit a stark contrast to the turmoil roiling beneath his composed exterior. His eyes darted from face to face, each smile and laugh a reminder of his crumbling empire. A waiter brushed past, offering champagne. Ethan snatched a flute, downing it in one gulp. The bubbles did little to quell the acid churning in his stomach. "Mr. Calloway." Grant Meyer's booming voice cut through the chatter. "So glad you could make it. Have you seen our centerpiece?" Ethan's gaze followed Grant's gesture, landing on the gleaming Aston Martin. His Aston Martin. The car he'd given away as a joke now stood proudly on display, a beacon of hope and charity. "Quite impressive." Ethan managed his throat tight. Grant beamed. "Indeed. And wait until you hear about the man behind it all. Jacob Harper has done wonders for our community." As if summoned, Jacob appeared, Emily Rivera at his side. The crowd parted, murmurs of admiration following in their wake. Ethan's fingers tightened around the empty champagne flute. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The car was meant to crush Jacob, not elevate him. "Jacob," Grant called out. "Come meet our generous sponsor, Mr. Calloway." Jacob froze, his eyes locking with Ethan's. Recognition flashed across his face, followed quickly by a mix of emotions Ethan couldn't quite decipher. "We've met," Jacob said coolly, extending his hand. "It's been a while, Mr. Calloway." Ethan shook Jacob's hand, the warmth of the other man's grip a stark contrast to the ice in his own veins. "Indeed it has, Mr. Harper." Emily glanced between them, sensing the tension. "Jacob has told me so much about your generosity, Mr. Calloway. That car has changed so many lives." Ethan's carefully constructed mask slipped for a moment. "Has it now?" Before Jacob could respond, a commotion erupted near the auction block. A red-faced man in an ill-fitting tuxedo was shouting, his words slurred but unmistakable. "This is a sham. You're all fawning over some grease monkey with a stolen car." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Jacob, who stood rigid, his jaw clenched. Grant stepped forward, his voice firm. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The man sneered. "Not until someone explains how this nobody affords a car worth more than this entire neighborhood." Ethan felt the weight of expectation settle on his shoulders. He could end this with a word, confirm that he'd given Jacob the car. But the word stuck in his throat. Jacob squared his shoulders, addressing the crowd. I didn't steal anything. This car was given to me, and I've used it to help others. That's all that matters. A ripple of approval went through the crowd. The drunk man, however, wasn't finished. Given to you. By who? Santa Claus. He lurched forward, grabbing Jacob's lapel. You're nothing but a fraud. In a flash, the situation devolved. Jacob, defending himself, pushed the man away. The drunk swung wildly, his fist connecting with Jacob's jaw. The crowd gasped as Jacob stumbled back, nearly knocking over a display. Ethan watched, paralyzed, as chaos erupted. Security guards rushed in, trying to separate the combatants. Emily cried out, reaching for Jacob. Grant attempted to restore order, his voice lost in the din. And still, Ethan stood frozen. A hand gripped his arm. Amanda, her eyes blazing. Aren't you going to do something? Ethan blinked, shaking off his stupor. What am I supposed to do? The truth, Ethan. For once in your life, tell the truth. Their eyes locked, a silent battle of wills. Then, something in Ethan snapped. He strode forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. Enough! The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. Ethan took a deep breath. The car belongs to Mr. Harper. I gave it to him myself. The drunk man sputtered. But why? Ethan's gaze swept the room, landing on Jacob's bruised face. Because I believed he could do more good with it than I ever could. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, but it had the desired effect. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by murmurs of admiration. As security escorted the drunk man out, Ethan found himself cornered by Amanda. That was unexpected, she said, studying him closely. Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. It was necessary. Amanda's eyes narrowed. Was it? Or is there more to this story? Before Ethan could respond, Jacob approached, his expression unreadable. Can we talk? Jacob's voice was low, meant only for Ethan's ears. Privately. Ethan nodded, following Jacob to a secluded corner of the ballroom. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Jacob broke the silence first. Why did you lie for me? Ethan's carefully constructed facade cracked. I don't know. Jacob's eyes hardened. You don't know. You gave me that car as a joke, didn't you? To watch me fail. Ethan flinched at the accusation, true as it was. I never expected this. No, you wouldn't have, Jacob said bitterly. You probably don't even remember me, do you? I used to work for one of your companies, until you decided to streamline operations and laid off half the workforce. The color drained from Ethan's face as recognition dawned. Jacob Harper, you were in R&D. Jacob nodded grimly. That layoff nearly ruined me. But this car, it gave me a second chance. A chance to help others who were struggling like I was. Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. His cruel joke, meant to amuse himself at the expense of someone he saw as beneath him, had instead sparked a chain of events he could never have predicted. I had no idea, Ethan whispered, the weight of his actions crushing down on him. Jacob's laugh was hollow. Of course you didn't. Men, like you never do. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to respond, but Jacob cut him off. Save it. I don't need your explanations or your guilt. What's done is done. But know this, Mr. Calloway. That car you gave away as a joke, it's changed lives. It's given hope to people who had none. And that's something your money could never buy. With that, Jacob turned and walked away, leaving Ethan alone with the wreckage of his choices. The rest of the gala passed in a blur. Ethan moved through the crowd like a ghost, deaf to the praise and congratulations heaped upon him for his generosity. All he could see was Jacob's face, twisted with pain and betrayal. As the night wore on, Ethan found himself drawn back to the Aston Martin. He ran his hand along its sleek curves, remembering the day he'd handed over the keys with a smirk and a cruel joke. It suits him better than it ever suited you. Ethan turned to find Amanda at his side, her eyes soft with understanding. "I've been such a fool, Amanda," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. Amanda placed a hand on his arm. "It's never too late to change, Ethan, to make amends." For the first time in years, Ethan felt the sting of tears in his eyes. How do I fix this?" Amanda smiled gently. "By doing what Jacob did, by using what you have to help others. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but it's a start." As the last of the guests filtered out, Ethan stood alone in the empty ballroom. The Aston Martin gleamed under the fading lights, a silent testament to the power of kindness and the unexpected consequences of cruelty. In that moment, Ethan Calloway, titan of industry, master of the universe, felt smaller and more insignificant than he ever had in his life. But as he gazed at the car that had become a symbol of hope, he felt something else stirring in his chest. Hope. For the first time in years, Ethan felt hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult. There would be amends to make, bridges to rebuild, and a lifetime of selfish choices to atone for. But as Ethan stepped out into the cool night air, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The joke was on him, and it was time to start laughing. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ethan Calloway's office as he stared at the headlines splashed across his computer screen. Calloway Industries implicated in massive fraud scheme. His empire, built on cunning and cutthroat tactics, was crumbling before his eyes. A sharp knock on the door jolted him from his stupor. His assistant, pale-faced and trembling, entered. "Sir, the board is demanding an emergency meeting. The press is camped out in the lobby. What should I tell them?" Ethan's jaw clenched. Nothing. Tell them nothing. As the door closed, leaving him alone once more, the weight of his choices pressed down on him like a physical force. He'd always prided himself on being untouchable, above the petty concerns of ordinary people. Now, he was just another disgraced businessman, his name synonymous with greed and corruption. His phone buzzed incessantly, calls from lawyers, board members, reporters. Ethan ignored them all, his eyes drawn instead to a framed photo on his desk. It was from the charity gala, showing Jacob Harper standing proudly next to the Aston Martin. The car that was meant to be a cruel joke had become a symbol of hope and redemption, everything Ethan's life lacked. With trembling hands, Ethan reached for his phone and dialed a number he'd sworn he'd never use. "Amanda, it's Ethan. I need your help." Across town, Jacob Harper wiped the sweat from his brow as he finished changing the oil in a battered pickup truck. The garage was busier than ever, a steady stream of customers drawn by Jacob's reputation for fairness and generosity. Emily Rivera approached, her son Mason in tow. "Jacob, have you seen the news?" Jacob shook his head, reaching for a rag to clean his hands. "Been too busy. What's going on?" Emily's eyes were wide with disbelief. "It's Ethan Calloway. His company's imploded. They're saying he might face criminal charges." Jacob froze, the rags slipping from his fingers. The man who'd given him the car as a cruel joke, who'd fired him years ago without a second thought, was now facing ruin. He should have felt satisfaction, maybe even joy. Instead, all he felt was a hollow ache in his chest. "Uncle Jacob." Mason tugged at his sleeve, oblivious to the tension. "Can we go for a ride in the special car?" Jacob managed a smile, ruffling the boy's hair. "Sure thing, champ. Let me just finish up here." As Jacob closed up the garage, his mind raced. The Aston Martin gleamed in the afternoon sun, a constant reminder of how a single act, even one born of cruelty, could spark unexpected change. He was about to climb into the driver's seat when a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the lot. Ethan Calloway, looking haggard and beaten, his expensive suit rumpled and stained. "Mr. Harper," Ethan's voice cracked. "I need to talk to you." Jacob's first instinct was to tell Ethan to leave, to let him face the consequences of his actions alone. But something in the man's broken expression gave him pause. "Get in." Jacob jerked his head towards a passenger seat. "We'll talk while we drive." As they cruised through the city streets, An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Finally, Ethan spoke, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I've lost everything. My company, my reputation, probably my freedom. And the worst part is, I deserve it all." He turned to Jacob, his eyes red-rimmed. "I came to apologize. For everything. The layoffs, the car. I've been a fool, and I've hurt so many people along the way." Jacob's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Why now? Why come to me?" Ethan's laugh was hollow. "Because you're the only one who might understand. This car, it was meant to be a joke, a way to mock someone I saw as beneath me. But you turned it into something beautiful. You helped people, gave them hope. I want to know how. I need to know if there's any way I can make things right." Jacob pulled the car to a stop outside a rundown community center. Children played in the yard, their laughter a stark contrast to the peeling paint and cracked windows. "You want to make things right?" Jacob's voice was firm. "Start here. These kids need after-school programs, tutoring, meals. Their parents need job training and childcare. You've got resources, connections. Use them for something good for once." Ethan stared at the children, then back at Jacob. "You really think I can make a difference?" Jacob's expression softened. "I think anyone can make a difference if they choose to. The question is, are you willing to try?" For the first time in years, Ethan felt a spark of something he'd long forgotten: hope. Over the next few months, Ethan threw himself into charity work with the same fervor he'd once applied to making money. He worked alongside Jacob, Amanda, and countless others, using his business acumen to streamline operations and maximize impact. The community center was transformed, its walls bright with fresh paint and new murals. Children who'd once roamed the streets now had a safe place to learn and play. Parents found new jobs and opportunities, their lives slowly but surely improving. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Ethan and Jacob stood watching a group of kids playing basketball on the new court, Amanda approached, a mischievous glint in her eye. "I've got a surprise for you too," she said, leading them to the parking lot. There, gleaming in the sunlight, stood the Aston Martin. But it was different now, painted a vibrant blue, with the words "Hope on Wheels" emblazoned on the side. "What's this?" Ethan asked, running his hand along the smooth paint. Amanda smiled. "It's the centerpiece of our new mobile outreach program. We'll use it to deliver supplies, provide medical checkups, whatever the community needs." Jacob laughed, shaking his head in wonder. From a millionaire's toy to a beacon of hope. Who would have thought? As they admired the car, Amanda's expression grew serious. "There's something else you should know, Ethan. I've been doing some digging into our family history. That car, it originally belonged to Dad." Ethan's jaw dropped. "What? How is that possible?" Amanda nodded. "He sold it years ago to start his first business. The business that eventually became Callaway Industries. In a way, this car has come full circle." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. Their father had always preached the importance of giving back, of using wealth to help others. Somewhere along the way, Ethan had lost sight of that lesson. But now, looking at the transformed Aston Martin, he felt a sense of connection to his father that he hadn't experienced in years. "Well," Jacob clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Shall we take her for a spin? I hear there's a food bank across town that could use some help." As they climbed into the car, Ethan in the passenger seat and Jacob behind the wheel, Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the journey that had brought them to this point. A cruel joke had sparked a chain of events that had changed not just their lives, but the lives of an entire community. "You know," Ethan mused as they pulled out onto the street, "used to think it was all about the car, the status, the luxury. But I was wrong. It wasn't the car that mattered. It was the man behind the wheel." Jacob grinned, revving the engine. "Well, buckle up, Mr. Callaway. We've got a lot of miles ahead of us and a lot of good to do." As the Aston Martin, now a symbol of hope and redemption, sped through the city streets, Ethan Callaway felt something he hadn't experienced in years: true, unbridled joy. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time in his life, he was looking forward to the journey. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the city. In the fading light, the hope on wheels, Aston Martin gleamed, a beacon of possibility in a world that sometimes seemed dark. And behind the wheel, two unlikely friends, a former millionaire and a humble mechanic, drove towards a future neither could have imagined, but both were eager to build together. As they rounded a corner, a group of children on the sidewalk cheered and waved. Ethan and Jacob waved back, their smiles wide and genuine. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of community and the promise of a new day, Ethan realized that he'd gained something far more valuable than all the wealth he'd lost. He'd found purpose, he'd found redemption, and most importantly, he'd found a way to make a real difference in the world. The Aston Martin purred down the street, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of a community. And as the city lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk, Ethan Callaway knew that this was just the beginning of the most important journey of his life.